Today's episode was recorded remotely from Eugene, Oregon, London, England, and Cooperstown, New York. Please be sure to check out our other episodes, including one with Weezer frontman Rivers Cuomo on computer coding. Don't forget to click subscribe and please rate the show on your podcast platform of choice.
This is a very remote island, an uninhabited island. There are no records of, for example, World War II aircraft being lost in that vicinity. But we do have the story of Amelia Earhart. We do have the hypothesis that she landed her aircraft on the island. So it's natural to consider the likelihood that this object could represent what remains of that aircraft.
Welcome to Sync for Science, the show where musicians and scientists talk about music and science. I'm your host, Matt White. Each week we'll talk about a song by our guest artist and how it connects with our guest scientist's area of expertise. Today we'll be speaking with J. Willgoose Esquire, founder of the English band Public Service Broadcasting. The band's albums integrate instrumental music with archival audio drawn from specific historical periods, ranging from the US-Soviet space race to the Welsh coal mining industry during the middle of the last century. Their most recent album, The Last Flight, is centered around Amelia Earhart's ill-fated final trip in 1937, from which she never returned and from which her airplane, the Lockheed Electra, was never recovered. Also joining us is Executive Director of the Archaeological Legacy Institute, Dr. Rick Pettigrew. Dr. Pettigrew has over 50 years field experience working as an archaeologist and has recently made headlines for spearheading an expedition to investigate what he believes is the final resting place of Amelia Earhart's aircraft on a remote island in the Western Pacific. Rick's mission to investigate his hypothesis is complex and truly multidisciplinary, drawing not just on archaeology, but also meteorology, geomorphology, photogrammetry, and history. The title of this week's episode on the podcast is The Last Flight: Archaeology and the Enduring Mystery of Amelia Earhart's Disappearance. Hello, Rick and Jay. How are you?
I'm good, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity to answer your questions and to meet Jay.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet Rick as well.
Your band has carved out quite a niche all its own. So could you describe the concept behind what it is that you do for our listeners?
Yeah, it's quite odd how it's turned into the thing that it's turned into, but nevertheless it has turned into it. It started off as me taking samples from public information films and kind of sprinkling them over electronic music that I was making on my own, just to kind of give it a bit of a human character, human voice. And from there, I kind of started to realize you could do more than just using them as window dressing and in a kind of kitsch way. And you could actually, build a story and build kind of emotional depth into that story if you use the samples in the right way. So that led to kind of more long form storytelling in the form of albums like The Race for Space, which told the story of the Soviet and American space race in 57 to 72. And yeah, on to the most recent one, which you've already introduced, The Last Flight. So it's snippets from history set alongside new music and kind of bringing the past into the present so that we can re-examine it rather than sort of being an exercise in nostalgia. That's the idea behind it.
Well, and this is a perfect opportunity to do so with Rick here. So I guess before we dive into his work, I'd like it if you could explain how you approach the work. Walk us through the research that goes into it. What comes first, the archival or the composition?
Well, neither of those comes first, actually. The reading comes first. Kind of reading about the subject. And I wanted to write a more female-focused story for this record because most archive is overwhelmingly male-based. We're four men in a band as well, and I just kind of started to get sick of hearing men talking about manly things. So I was on the lookout for a story like Amelia's, and when I knew the headlines about her, but I didn't know the specifics of her last journey. When I read that she had written her own version of that Last Flight, which was published posthumously, I kind of jumped at the chance because that reading is a kind of a primary source really of her account of her journey And from there, it's kind of reading all around the subject and starting to kind of match it up to musical ideas, either in my head or kind of demos that I've already put down. So, yeah, the reading and the sort of background information is the big kind of early starter, and then the other two things kind of run kind of simultaneously. It's a hard process to describe.
Well, then how, just getting into the nuts and bolts of it, how do you actually pull the archival material?
Well, I suppose while I'm kind of researching, I might do a bit of a check to see if there's anything actually available, because you don't want to go too far down that route and then find that the stuff you want isn't licensable or doesn't exist. So with stuff like the Race for Space, I knew that NASA's stuff was wonderfully open and kind of democratic and open source and Creative Commons and all of that stuff, but the Soviet stuff was much more of a headache. And luckily, we already had some contacts at the British Film Institute, and they just inherited a whole tranche of Soviet educational films from the 50s and 60s, solely about the space race as kind of propaganda to pump into Western classrooms. So yeah, we managed to get hold of all that footage and tell the story that way. But yeah, it's different album by album. It can be a challenge to sort of track the stuff down. So we do take different approaches sometimes. It's not purely archive only. There's also lyrics and poetry and kind of, stuff taken from newspapers, revoiced, all that kind of stuff going into the mix.
And so for example, the audio from Electra, this is the track that's about, or referencing Amelia's lost aircraft. Sounds like it's got some, advertising copy voiceover over it. Where's that from?
Well, that is actually everything for this record was recorded here in my studio in Southeast London by actors. So the big challenge for this record was taking the kind of the historical material, which, as I said, was kind of pulled from books and from archive and from newspapers and all kinds of contemporary sources, and then voicing that up in a way that would sound convincingly 1930s.
Okay. Good to know.
So it's kind of, normally I'm trying to take bad quality audio and clean it up and make it sound good, and this was the other way around. It was kind of trying to take pristine studio quality audio and mangle the heck out of it, basically distort it
cool.
and put kind of all kinds of artifacts and room noise and work out what it is that gives those recordings from the 30s and 40s that kind of character. Yeah, I'm pleased that you said that, because it sounds like we kind of did a semi-good job of it. But
very, very convincing.
Yeah.
And Rick, you've actually set foot in a real Electra. And does the music video for Electra pay honest tribute to how you experienced it?
That's a very loaded question.
I would say very much so. And I have to say right off the bat that I found the music video to be very impressive. And the aircraft, it is exactly represented. I was quite impressed by that. And having seen the aircraft, I know that for a fact. And I've been inside the aircraft, so I have a pretty good experience of it. And what we have in that music video is a perfect representation of that aircraft, right down to the last detail.
You nailed it, Jay.
Well, I have to say, we actually bought the 3D model of it. I think there's a 3D model that you can buy for kind of rendering. So we were profiting. If ever a band was standing on the shoulders of giants, in general, that's us. But we're also profiting from other people's work in ways like, they've kind of rendered this model and put it up for sale for use in these kind of 3D environments. Okay. I think we did go to great pains to double check, stuff like the flight number was right and, trying to get the kind of movement of it right, give it the right kind of weight, which isn't always easy in a kind of computer generated environment. But it's still good to know that we're hitting some of the right marks. Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, I'm eager to really get into it, Rick, and ask you what sort of models of the Electra you use to inform your hypothesis. But before we do, I would just like to start out from kind of a zoomed out perspective, and I can't imagine anyone better to do this than you, Rick. But could you give us some sense of the scale of Amelia Earhart's celebrity and why this mystery continues to endure nearly 100 years later, and why we're so captivated by it?
Yeah, well, she was a rock star before there were rock stars. She was as famous as one could get. By the time she took off on her final flight, she already, I think, had 2 ticker tape parades in New York City. And I don't think that anybody could have been more famous than Amelia Earhart. It's likely that there were something like 1 billion people following her flight during the time while she was on it. Of course, that was way before the internet. That was before TV. People were glued to their radios, and they were reading the latest edition of the newspapers, and they were
Mm-hmm.
following it very closely. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that anybody could have been more famous than Amelia Earhart.
And so, can you tell us just where did the trip start out, and where was it supposed to have ended up?
Right. Well, it began in Oakland, California,
Mm-hmm.
and it was actually the second attempt. Just a month or so before that, she had tried to fly westward from Oakland. She actually made it to Honolulu and then suffered a mishap on takeoff from Honolulu on her
Mm-hmm.
way to Howland Island to the east. Crashed the aircraft, and it had to be, recovered, repaired, and taken back to California on a ship. They fixed it up, and then she decided she was going to continue the effort by going the opposite direction. So she flew from California to Florida to South America, Africa, South Asia, Middle East, etc., through Australia. And she was all the way after flying from Darwin, Australia, to Lae, New Guinea. She was on her third to the last leg, flying from Lae, New Guinea to Howland Island, which is a refueling stop, little island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, only about a mile in diameter. And the U.S. military was there. The Coast Guard was there. They had laid out an airfield for her. They had fuel ready for her to refuel her aircraft. She was going to land there, refuel, and then take off for Honolulu, and then finally back to Oakland. So she was on, the final stretch, over the
Mm-hmm.
Pacific Ocean of
And
her journey, and it was the longest stretch of all.
and so, and that brings to mind something from your record, Jay. There's a soundbite where she's talking about flying west, right? Which track is that?
Yeah, it's the second track, Towards the Dawn, which covers that kind of abortive journey westward. And then, yeah, as Rick says, she crashed on takeoff, and by the time it was repaired, the global weather patterns had changed, so she had to go east instead. Yeah, so I'm interested. This is kind of a bit of a tangent, but my personal pet theory is when she was going west from Honolulu to Howland, I think she had a much better chance of making that trip. A, because it's shorter going from Honolulu to Howland than from Lae to Howland. B, she had a dedicated radio operator on board, and all the issues she kind of ended up having were kind of radio based, really, as well as kind of navigational, but that was heavily influenced by not being able to communicate properly. And 3 or C, I can't remember if I was doing letters or numbers. She wasn't flying into the sun. She wasn't flying east towards the dawn to try and locate this tiny island in the Pacific. So she may well have had better visibility. So I wonder if she'd been able to take off from Honolulu. My personal theory is she may well have stood a much better chance of making it and may well have done it. Sadly, events conspired the other way, but there you go.
Yeah, I really don't know what would have happened, but the radio issue is critical. With the absence of the radio navigation equipment, she was flying purely on celestial navigation. Fred Noonan, her navigator, was with her. And he was an excellent navigator. He was trained, of course, on ships and then transferred that to aircraft. But he was using old-fashioned navigation, using celestial navigation, and they did not have radio capabilities for navigating. And that proved, I think, to be a fatal flaw.
There's an interesting anecdote that comes up, Rick, in one of your presentations on the Archaeology channel about the young girl in Florida who claimed to have picked up a transmission from her father's shortwave radio. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's Betty Clank. Betty Clank in Florida. It's an amazing story. She liked to listen to her dad's radio. Her dad had a really pretty fancy shortwave radio, and they had stretched a long wire in the backyard as an antenna so it could pick up, faint signals. And she liked to just cruise the dial. And she was doing that one evening. I'm sure, not sure exactly what time of day. But anyway, she happened upon this voice on the radio claiming to be Amelia Earhart. She ended up listening to this for about an hour and a half, and she brought her dad in to listen as well. She had a notebook. She had been taking notes. She was in the habit of making notes in her diary, and she tried to transcribe what she was hearing. And that record exists. That was that's now available on the Tiger website. That's TIGHAR, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery. They've, by the way, been studying the Nikumaroro hypothesis and going back to the island a dozen times over the span of about 4 decades. Anyway, Betty listened. She wrote down what she heard. There was a lot of interesting information in there. It appeared that it was from inside of the aircraft. There was a man's voice. She was having a conversation with a man there, and you have to interpret what's written down. It's not that easy to know exactly what everything means, but it looks real. It looks like it was really happening. And among those things, for example, she wrote down in her notebook NY, NY, NY. And and Tiger interviewed her actually before she passed away. And she said that what she heard was New York City, New York City, New York City. And of course, that doesn't make any sense, right? Until you realize that on Nikumaroro, the freighter Norwich City was up on the reef. It had been washed up there in a storm in 1929. And the name of the ship was clearly visible, clearly legible on the side of the ship, the Norwich City. So we think very likely that she was simply saying Norwich City, as a way of trying to bring attention to her location, because she didn't. She may not have known what island she was actually on, but she could see that ship. Anyway, there's a lot of little pieces of information in that notebook. It's a pretty fascinating story.
Jay, did that come up in your research, that anecdote?
No, it didn't. To be honest, I wasn't kind of focusing on. I didn't want to kind of posit theories of where she actually ended up. I wanted to go purely on like the 100% facts, and those being, sort of beyond any kind of dispute that she lost radio contact somewhere within maybe 100 miles of Howland Island, and from there, didn't broadcast anymore and hasn't been seen since. Obviously, there's lots of kind of scattered clues around the area that have taken people off in different directions, but I wanted to kind of deal with what we knew for certain, I suppose, and I think it's actually it's a more satisfying end in a way to the record, treating it just as kind of a the story of her last flight, to have it end there with the kind of the disappearance, rather than kind of have a rather unsatisfying coda of like, she could be here, she could be there, we have this, we have that. It felt kind of interesting but extraneous, I suppose, to the story I was trying to tell. But yeah, it's all fascinating stuff.
So speaking of, the last track on the album is called Howland, and that's the island where she'd planned to refuel. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the field recording you used at the end? Yeah, we kind of recreated from the sort of the various versions of transcripts out there. We recreated, the calls that she was making to the Itasca, and vice versa. Their kind of in vain attempts to communicate with her. I think they only managed direct communication once, maybe twice. So those kind of snippets are through the main course of this very sort of mournful string-based piece, and then the kind of the music fades to nothing. There's kind of a burst of static, and then I got in touch with the US kind of Pacific remote island management guys who are in Honolulu, because I knew you can't go as a member of the public to Howland, and I wanted to see if there'd be a way of recording some kind of wild track from there and ending the record with that. So I said, I know you get a lot of strange emails, or I'm sure you get a lot of strange emails, but I wonder if anyone's going to Howland anytime soon, or if anyone has any audio recordings from there, and this is what I'm trying to do with it. Thank you very much. Not expecting to hear back at all, but yeah, a very nice chap called Stefan got back to me and said, yeah, we do get a lot of weird emails, and you're definitely one of them, but here's some wild track from Howland. So the record ends with kind of the sound of the waves and the surf and some sooty turns kind of babbling away, and it just felt like a nice way to kind of capture the emotion that we'd previously referred to of the tide rising, the tide falling, kind of the earth carrying on turning, life going on, despite the kind of,
this human endeavor and however it ended up. Yeah, it was kind of a way of sort of making referring back to the bigger picture, I suppose.
Okay. And Rick, how far is Howland Island from Nikumaroro, where you suggest her aircraft probably ended up?
Right. I think it's on the order of 300 to 400 miles to the south and east from Howland Island. It's on a line of position that she actually uh, reported in the radio. It's documented, that line of position, which runs south and east of Howland Island. If you follow that line to the southeast, you get to Nikumaroro. And we think very likely that she did travel in that direction on that line, because she and Fred Noonan both knew that if you traveled to the north on that line, you would not see any land until you got to Kamchatka. So, right. So they most likely followed that line to the south, which would have led them to Nikumaroro, which is a much more visible island than Howland Island. Nikumaroro is about 4.5 miles long. It has a lagoon, which is about 3.5 miles long in the middle of it. So it's a big target, which is easy to find, even if there are clouds about.
And is Nikumaroro and Howland part in that same group of Phoenix Islands?
No, Howland is distant from the Phoenix Islands. Howland is basically stands up by itself, way up in the north, and it's near Baker Island, but not the Phoenix Island. So it's a different island chain altogether.
Okay.
The Phoenix Islands have a number of other islands, including Canton, which is the only other island today that has any people living on it in that group.
It's such a fascinating story listening to you. I mean, it's no wonder that the Indiana Jones franchise makes for such riveting cinema. Can you talk to us a little bit about all the detective work that's gone into putting together this hypothesis?
Right. Well, first, I have to say that most of the research that has been done in relation to this has been done by TIGER, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, headed by Rick Gillespie. Beginning in 1989, they have been going back and forth to Nikumaroro and doing an incredible amount of research in every possible way to explore this hypothesis. So we begin with that. We didn't do all that work. What our point of departure from that work is the Taraia object itself. The Taraia object, of course, is in the lagoon at Nikumaroro. There's plenty of evidence that Earhart and Noonan were on the island, lots of various evidence. However, we don't have the so-called smoking gun evidence, which is absolute proof. The only absolute proof would come in the form of finding DNA evidence of Amelia Earhart specifically, or finding direct evidence of the aircraft that she flew there. Efforts have been made to find DNA evidence, and they have failed so far. And various pieces of aircraft aluminum have been found on the island, but aircraft aluminum is no different from one airplane to another, really, from that period. So we can't prove that aluminum or even the plexiglass that they have found there on the island actually comes from that aircraft. In order to demonstrate that, we would have to find enough of the wreckage to be able to identify it very, very, very clearly as the Electra aircraft. So when I saw the Taraia object, and after thinking about it for a while and considering the evidence, it became very interesting to me as to whether this could actually be wreckage from the aircraft. So that's the point of departure from the work that's been done by TIGER. Because even at this point, Rick Gillespie does not think it's likely that the Taraia object represents the wreckage of the aircraft, and that's where we differ.
How did the image of the Taraia object come on your radar, so to speak?
Right. Well, it was back in 1920 when Michael Ashmore, who's a gentleman in California, raised a flag and said, "Hey, what's this?" He had been looking in Apple Maps at satellite image, which we're looking at right here.
In 2020.
In 2020, he saw that in Apple Maps, and he's an Amelia Earhart, research aficionado. He was familiar enough with TIGER's work that he was looking in the lagoon of Nikumaroro in Apple Maps, and he saw that. So he raised the alert and said, "Hey, what's this?" He presented it to Tiger. I became aware of it at that time. I didn't get too excited about it because people very frequently raise questions like, "What's this?" People are often finding things that they think look like the aircraft, and we get that all the time. So I didn't get too excited too much, and then Rick Gillespie and Tiger started looking at it. They had an online discussion about it, and the end of their discussion was, "Well, it's probably a tree."
Mm.
Well, that was brought to my attention again the next year. Somebody asked me, "Well, do you maybe have a picture of it, possibly in your drone footage?" Well, I had been there in 2017, and I brought a drone and I flew the drone around the island, got a lot of video footage. We didn't know about the tri object at that time, so I didn't really look before that. Then I went back into the footage and I found it. I've got images of it from 4 different directions in my drone footage.
But you were on the island because you had a hunch that that's where the wreckage might be?
I was on the island because I was connected with Tiger and their archaeologist, Tom King. I had always wanted to go there and do something with them. And finally, in 2017, I had that opportunity to do that. So I was on a Tiger expedition with Dr. Tom King.
Connected to the Amelia Earhart matter.
Exactly. I mean,
Okay.
this was one of the many expeditions that Tiger has conducted on Nikumaroro.
Mhm.
And I finally was able to join them on one. And we were there for about 8 days, walking back and forth. I had the lucky circumstance in which I was able to pretty much have the run of the island. I visited many parts of the island. Um, well, most of the people on that expedition were focused on the Seven site, which is the site in the eastern end of the island, where apparently the bones were found in 1940. And Tom
Mhm.
King and his people have been excavating at that site several times over that span of time. And they were there doing that. Well, I was looking around doing other things,
And Tom
exploring.
King, is he an archaeologist?
Yeah, Dr. Tom King was the
Mhm.
tiger archaeologist
Mhm.
associated with Rick Gillespie going way back to 1989.
Okay.
And he's been on the island many times. And he's a longtime archaeologist colleague of mine. I've worked with him on other projects. And I knew, of course, I was very familiar with his work with Tiger on Nikumaroro. And of course, I'm fascinated by the Amelia Earhart story, right? I mean, I grew up
Mhm.
as a kid with it, like the disappearance of Amelia Earhart is something that like everybody knew about when I was growing up. And
Mm.
one of those mystery stories that intrigues people. So with Tom King working on it actually on the island, I got really interested and focused in on it. And as I said, I eventually had the chance to go there. Anyway, I flew the drone, got these images, and in 2021, I started getting more interested in it. At that time, after having been on the island, we organized a symposium here in Eugene in connection with our film festival. We brought together a number of people who had been with us in 2017 on the island, as well as others. And I invited Michael Ashmore to come up from California and make a presentation about the Taraia object, and he did. That was in June of 2021. He made the presentation. I was very fascinated by it, and very shortly after that, I started looking very carefully at the evidence and started thinking about how to get back to the island to take a look at this thing and see if it really could be the wreckage or part of the wreckage of the Electra aircraft.
Now, you've skipped over what to me is the most staggering detail from your trip, that you happened upon a shoe that matches Amelia's foot size
Right,
and it would be historically accurate.
right. We were there in 2017, a number of us walking around looking for things, and I wasn't the one actually who found the shoe, but somebody found it. I think, in fact, it was Tom King's son who found it. Anyway,
In a dig, or was it just sitting out in the open?
right out in the open, in the old colonial village, not far just a few feet from the channel,
Mhm.
along with some other stuff. There was a group of objects that we found there, including that shoe, and we found a 1930s flashlight and some other things. To me, it looked like it had been washed in by a flood because it was mixed with seashells and so forth. It looked like it had been water deposited. But yeah, we found that shoe, which is the kind of style that Amelia Earhart liked to wear. It
Mhm.
looks like the right size. And there it was, lying right there on the ground.
Mhm.
But, you can't prove that that's Amelia Earhart's shoe. After we brought it back, DNA analysis was applied to it, but there was no human DNA that could be found on it. So it's like many pieces of evidence that exist from Nikumaroro, which is consistent with the hypothesis that Amelia and Fred landed there and lived there for a time. A lot of evidence consistent with that hypothesis, but nothing that is absolute conclusive proof. So we found that evidence, but not a lot was made out of it. It wasn't trumpeted a lot because it's not absolute proof. It falls in line with other kinds of proof, such as evidence from the Seven site, which includes objects that apparently relate to an American woman from the 1930s, but nothing that has Amelia Earhart inscribed on it.
But you found that prescription bottle from a Toluca Lake pharmacy, which is where she lived, right?
Right. Well, we can't say for sure it is from Toluca Lake Pharmacy. That was found by Tiger on the island in the village area in 2015, the previous expedition. They
Mhm.
actually left it there at that location, and we
Mhm.
found it in 2017.
Mhm.
It says it has an inscription on it. It's a pharmacy, medicine vial.
Mhm.
You can read UCA Pharmacy, right?
Mm.
So the rest of it is not legible. But
Okay.
we know that Amelia lived only about a mile and a half from the Toluca Lake Pharmacy.
Yep.
That's the pharmacy that she used. Um, and again, it's an intriguing piece of evidence. We
Mhm.
can't prove on the basis of that came from Amelia Earhart. But when you
Okay.
combine all the pieces of evidence that exist,
Mhm.
including the radio transmission evidence, the radio bearings, um, the Bevington object, many other things, that preponderance of evidence really points to Nikumaroro as the final landing place for Amelia Earhart. But what we're looking for now, and what we might have a chance to find, is the smoking gun evidence, which I think is likely to be the Taraia object.
And so, I mean, you've just kind of given us a little inkling of how multidisciplinary it is what you do. Just give me a quick survey of the different disciplines involved. I mean, we're talking about you talk about when something's water deposited. Is that under the umbrella of geomorphology?
Yes, it is. Archaeology, many people think that archaeology is all about digging square holes in the ground. That's a very simplistic way of looking at archaeology. Really, think about archaeology as a discipline that wants to explore the human past through the use of physical evidence.
Mm-hmm.
There are many kinds of physical evidence that can enable us to look into the past. It's not just stuff that's in the dirt. We can use DNA, for example. We can use historical documentation. It helps in interpreting the physical evidence. It helps us to understand, it helps us to know how things are deposited and how to recognize the way it was deposited. Geomorphology is very important for that. We need to know a good deal about geology, especially sedimentary archaeology,
Mm-hmm.
because much of the evidence is associated with geological context. And you need to understand the context. So,
Mm-hmm.
as I said, when I was on the island in 2017, I saw this concentration of material on the surface in the northern colonial village area, and a number of different things, including the shoe and the flashlight and some
Mm-hmm.
other objects. It looked like it had been water deposited. At the time, I wasn't even aware that there had been a major storm in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
right? Tropical cyclone Pam. And now it all fits together for me. I mean, that it looks to me like that material was deposited in 2015 by Tropical Cyclone Pam. And I think the best interpretation is that it was basically brought up from the reef area or the ocean bottom by the current and deposited on the island.
Where you think she may have landed initially.
Exactly. So the Nikumaroro hypothesis has it that Amelia and Fred landed their Lockheed Electra aircraft on the northwestern reef flat of Nikumaroro Island. That reef flat, many people don't they think that a reef is just a rough, rocky area, but actually, a reef that's been exposed to ocean waves for millennia, for eons, can be flattened out, and that's what we have on the northwestern reef of the of Nikumaroro. It's flat like a tarmac, and it's exposed at low tide. And when she arrived at the island, and at that time the tide was low, so she would have been able to land on that reef. We think she landed on that reef. Plane was intact. She was able to send out radio messages because the plane was intact for a period of about 4 days. And then by 7 days after the disappearance, when the Navy flew over with their aircraft, they didn't see the Electra. We have to account for that. But I think what happened is that the tide rose up eventually and floated the aircraft off the reef, subjected it to the waves and the surf. The plane broke apart. Various parts went in different directions. But the biggest part, the fuselage, which was full of empty fuel tanks, would have been very buoyant and would easily have floated through the passage into the lagoon.
Okay.
Anyway, in the process of that happening, a lot of material would have dumped out from the fuselage onto the reef. Some of which is probably still there, caught in the cracks and so forth of the reef. And occasionally a big storm comes up with a storm surge and lifts some of it up and drops it on the island.
I think one thing that's important to touch upon is the methods that you're applying here. And it just seems that a great deal of care is going into employing quite a bit of diplomacy here. And my interpretation is that it just seems like an effort to right the wrongs of archaeology's past with plunder. I mean, I've been to some museums in England. Sorry to put you on the spot here, Jay, but it just would seem that there's many efforts are being made to either send back artifacts that were taken without permission. So, Rick, maybe talk a little bit about how you're approaching this.
Well, you may be referring to the fact that Nikumaroro is part of the country of Kiribati. Kiribati is a country that was made up from the colonial holdings of Great Britain and some other places. They became an independent country, I think, back in the 70s. So in order for us to go to Nikumaroro, for example, we need to get government permission.
Mm-hmm.
So we have been in contact with government officials in Taraia, which is the capital of Kiribati, meeting with them. Yes, diplomacy is very important. We need to get a permit from Kiribati, and so we want to develop a relationship with them. We want to be able to ensure them that our activities on their island are in keeping with their interests. Of course, the fact that Amelia may have landed her aircraft on the island brings us some interesting questions, such as who owns it, right? But we don't really want to get into some sort of a debate about who owns it. What we want to do is develop a productive partnering relationship with the government of Kiribati and the people of Kiribati to try to make our project a benefit for everybody involved. I'm painfully aware of the colonial history, not only there, but elsewhere in the world, including in North America. And as an archaeologist, I feel an ethical responsibility, not necessarily to right wrongs of the past, but to move forward in a different way, in a way that is beneficial to everybody. My own feeling about archaeology is that it's about our history that is speaking as a species, right? It's about the human past, and there are many different kinds of humans, many cultures, many different racial groups, But it's all the same story with many different parts, many different episodes. We, I think, in archaeology, are telling a very important story, which we need to share with people, everybody, everywhere. And I think that's part of what we're doing here.
So, Jay, I know you when you made this record, you set out to deal specifically with the historical record, as you said. But in all the research that you were doing and you were becoming familiar with the geography of the area, did this come up at all? The Nikumaroro hypothesis and what you were looking into?
I'd read some of the Taiga stuff about it being the most likely place that it should go on. What I have to say I really like about how Rick's presenting his theories and his information and his evidence is being honest about how you can't prove this and you can't prove that, but there's a weight of evidence that suggests, preponderance, I think is the word he used. With Taiga stuff, my feeling reading it was kind of jumping to conclusions rather than kind of pointing out potentialities, which made me slightly kind of back away from it a bit. So I didn't get too deep into it. I was just kind of like,
Tiger, you don't get a track on the record.
I don't know. I remember reading it and it seemed to have the air of certainty. And I kind of distrust certainty in life, especially with a big mystery like this. So I'm really intrigued by this. A lot of things about it do add up. I'd be fascinated to see what they do uncover if they manage to get back there, if Rick manages to go there. But yeah, I'd also like to hear, what are the difficulties facing this, besides the diplomacy and besides, the archaeological sensitivities, that you must need an awful lot of money to get out there with the right equipment, with the right people for as long as you need to be there. How do you raise that? Who's kind of going to help you out with that? Or is it like a self-funded thing?
Well, we've gone public with it and we put the word out and we've made some progress. One of the greatest occurrences, breakthroughs that we made was connecting with Purdue University. Purdue University has a great interest in the Amelia Earhart story because Amelia was on the Purdue faculty at that time. And Purdue actually bought and had that aircraft made for her for the world flight. So they have a great deal of interest in that. And Amelia Earhart is iconic on their campus and a very important part of their history. So when they learned that we were potentially going to find evidence of the aircraft, they got very interested. And they've been partnering with us ever since, starting back in about February of this year. So I'm very, very pleased with that. Now, that doesn't mean that Purdue is giving us all the money. They're not, but they are helping us to raise the money. And that's important because they have a huge network, much bigger than we do. So connecting with them was very important. But we also have a network, and we have had some success in fundraising. And yeah, Jay, it costs money, but that's the nature of it. I've been doing archaeology for a long time, and I've spent a lot of money doing archaeology on projects. And the order of magnitude of the budget for this project is no greater than other projects that I've worked on in the past. I don't think that it's necessarily an unusual amount of money, especially when you consider that we are going out into a distant island in the South Pacific Ocean. It's not something that where we can just drive to it, and do an excavation. It doesn't work that way. So yeah, it's expensive, but I think that the subject matter is important enough to justify this kind of investment.
How deep is what you suppose is the wreckage?
My interpretation, based purely on the satellite imagery and knowledge of the island, is that the object is somewhere between 2 and 5 meters below the surface of the water, keeping in mind that there are tidal fluctuations. So the tide fluctuates on the order of about a meter or more every day. And so it's very shallow, right? And not only underwater, but right now it appears to be under a thin layer of sediment. And that interpretation is based on analysis of the satellite imagery also, because in 2015, the object was directly visible as an object. Over a period of time until about in 2021, the It was visible up until that time as a direct thing, that is an object directly visible. But after that time, all we see now is the impression of it in the sediment. So it appears to be covered by a thin layer of sediment right now, but it's a very thin layer. So, we'll have people with us with scuba gear, but for me, I just have my snorkel gear. I'll bring that. That's all I'll need.
If it's that shallow and the layer of sediment is seemingly thin, why do you need? I saw in the inventory of gear you need to bring out there that included in that is metal detection equipment. Why do you need metal detection equipment if you could just snorkel down there and brush it and have a look?
Well, we have a pretty good idea of where it is, of course, from the satellite imagery. But we're only going to have 5 days on the island. We have to be as efficient and quick as possible. So we're going to do remote sensing first. We're going to do magnetometer work. We're going to do side scan sonar. And then we're going to do hydroprobing so that we can precisely identify the location of the object. So then we can come in with a hydraulic dredge and remove sediment from it without wasting any time, and get right down to it and get enough of it exposed so that we can get a look at it and identify what it is. So we've developed a plan which is designed to be as efficient as possible. If I just went in there with my snorkel gear without any previous analysis of that location, I might be looking in the wrong place. You don't have time to waste when you get there. You have to be very efficient. So that's what we're doing. And then besides that, the knowledge of the extent of it is important. We're not going to be able to expose the whole thing. Only a small part of it will we be able to expose because it's pretty big. And so that being the case, and since the purpose of our work is to identify it, not to fully excavate it or expose it or analyze it completely, since that is the scope of our work, we're just focused on doing that and just exposing a small part of it.
When people can look at the aerial photographs, what are the pieces that you see? You identify them as the fuselage and the tail. Is that right?
Those are interpretive hypotheses. We won't know what anything is until we actually go there. When I describe what they might be, this is part of the hypothesis. Let me step back, talk about the science a little bit. I'm a scientist. I'm not somebody who knows what he's trying to prove. And I'm aware that people react to the tiger hypothesis in various ways, including, as Jay just said, it may appear that there's too much certainty. Well, I'm not that way. I don't claim to know exactly what's there. What I think is that we need to test this hypothesis. This is a very scientific method. We believe that it very well could be the Electra aircraft. We're not saying we know what it is. The only thing I know for sure is that we have to go there and take a look at it.
Mm-hmm. So, to both your points about approaching this with some degree of skepticism, many times I hear scientists talk about approaching a hypothesis with the intention of trying to first disprove it rather than to look for corroborating evidence. Is archaeology any different?
Not really. Not really. Archaeology is a method in which we examine physical evidence and interpret it. It's not an experimental science. It's not like a hard science like physics or chemistry in that sense. But it is a science in which we look at physical evidence and interpret it. In that way, it's not that different from from history, because written documents can also be questioned. But what we do in archaeology is that we explore a site, we recover data from it, and we interpret that data in terms of the hypotheses that we have about what took place there. So we put together what you might say is a story about how to put the evidence together in a meaningful way to explain it. Not very rarely do we have the opportunity to actually prove something, because we don't have enough evidence to say without any question that we have interpreted it correctly. In this particular case, we have an opportunity to come to an actual conclusion. Because when we expose the object and we look at it and compare it to the Electra that we know, we can say conclusively, I believe, whether it is the Electra or it is not the Electra.
So, with the actual order of operations here in this instance, did you go about, like, if someone said, that's not a fuselage, it's a tree, would the first thing on your list be to say, I'm going to try and prove that this is a tree?
No, not really. I mean, that's an interesting approach from a philosophy of science standpoint. But the reality is that when we go there and expose it, we'll be able to distinguish between the tree and a metal object very quickly.
One would hope. I know, but I just meant from your, interpretation of aerial photographs.
Yeah, well, I think we've kind of reached we've gone as far as we can go with interpreting the aerial photography.
Mm-hmm.
The important thing is that the visual evidence is consistent with the interpretation that it is a metal object of substantial size
Mm-hmm.
that would be hard to account for unless it is in fact the Electra wreckage. This is a very remote island, an uninhabited island. There are no records of, for example, World War II aircraft being lost in that vicinity. But we do have the story of Amelia Earhart. We do have the hypothesis that she landed her aircraft on the island. So it's natural to consider the likelihood that this object could represent what remains of that aircraft. So it's really a very simple logical connection, but it's not proof. We have to go there to prove it.
I mean, to me, this sounds like plausibly a castaway situation where they landed and ended up marooned on this island, especially if these artifacts are being found. Mm-hmm. Just so I'm straight here, how is what you're talking about different from the castaway hypothesis as it's often referred to?
Yeah, it's really part of the same hypothesis. What you're referring to is the idea that Amelia and Fred landed on the island and were marooned there. The Seven site, which I referred to earlier, is apparently the place where bones were found in 1940, while the colonists were there.
Growing coconuts, is that right?
Yes, they were planting coconut trees, and that was the idea. The purpose for the colony was to establish a coconut plantation, and that existed for about 25 years before the British finally gave up and pulled the colonists off the island. But they were there in 1940, found these bones. The bones were brought, including a skull and some long bones. The bones were brought to Fiji, to Suva, where they were examined by a doctor at the colonial hospital there in Suva. The doctor measured them, wrote up a report, which went into a file. Ultimately, the bones were lost, and the report was not seen again until the 1990s when Tiger finally found it. Mm-hmm. It has measurements in it which are consistent with the size of Amelia Earhart. Since the bones are gone, we can't do DNA analysis and prove the bones are hers from that. But again, this is another piece of evidence where the what we know is consistent with the Nikumaroro hypothesis. So the idea, speaking of the castaway hypothesis, is that Amelia and Fred became castaways. Mm-hmm. And that at least one of them, perhaps Amelia, lived for a long enough time to move over to the northeastern side of the island, set up a camp, try to survive there for a time, and then expired, only to have her remains discovered a short time later.
Do I understand correctly that as recently as 5 or so years ago, corpse sniffing dogs were brought out to?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in 2017, when I was there, the dogs were brought to the island. The dogs, successfully identified locations where human remains were or had been. Mm-hmm. And they were successful in identifying that at the Seven site as well as in other places. For example, one of our sort of forays on the island was to the north, where we found a Polynesian cemetery. a group of burials there, and the dogs identified those as human, locations of human remains. So yeah, it was interesting to see that. That was an interesting way of exploring evidence, and it's another discipline that can be applied to archaeology.
What, forensic science?
Exactly. Hmm.
Yeah. This would be at the seventh site where the aborted attempt at growing coconuts.
No, the seventh site actually was pretty far away from the village location. The village location is in the southwestern part of the island alongside the passage. The
Okay.
seventh site is about as far away from that as you can get on the opposite side of the island.
The passage is through which the wreckage perhaps flowed into the lagoon. Yeah.
Yes, the passage is the main inlet connecting the ocean to the lagoon. Every day when the tide rises, the water
Mhm.
rushes into the lagoon. When the tide subsides, then the water exits the lagoon. So there's current going back and forth through that passage every day.
I encourage our listeners to look at the video version of this because we will include slides from Rick's PowerPoint that kind of illustrates everything we're talking about, and also the Legacy Institute has generously offered free subscriptions for a time to check out some of the lectures that I've referred to. Before we wrap up, do either of you have questions for one another?
Yeah, I was going to ask Jay. Jay, I was pretty interested in your album, and especially that music video. And I have to say that I'm very impressed by the amount of research that went into that. It was very accurate, and I think you did a better job than most people have done who are not actual scientists focusing on this project, on this mystery. So I applaud that. And I've always wanted to know how you pulled that off, but you actually answered those questions to Matt. So now I know a lot more.
Well, thank you, Rick. That's very, very kind of you. Yeah, when it's somebody like Amelia, I feel a great weight of responsibility to kind of to treat the source material with the respect it deserves, I suppose. So there's been various things we've covered that are very daft. We did a song about new fashions in corduroy kind of clothing in the sort of 50s and 60s, and obviously when you're dealing with really kitsch stuff like that, you don't owe the source material anything. But when you're dealing with somebody who's such an icon and such an incredible human being, not just for what she did as a pilot, but her entire life, she's a remarkable person. Yeah, I felt a great weight of responsibility to try and tell the story in the right way. So yeah, to have a vote of confidence like that is great. I did have a question for you,
Mhm.
which is, I'm sure you've been asked before, but if you had to put a percentage figure on it, based on everything that you've seen and what you think, when you go back to Nikumaroro, what percentage do you think you're likely to, you sort of 70% sure that it's the Electra, or are you more like 40-50, or are you 90? Like what's your kind of,
People
what's
ask
your
me,
level of,
people
yeah.
ask me to estimate the likelihood that we're correct. It's kind of like betting on a game, right?
Yeah, if you had to bet.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. If you have to bet, I would put your money on us. Actually, I don't know. I mean, I've had fun answering that question from people in the past, but I think we have a better than 50-50 chance. What I keep coming back to is this question. If this is not the Electra or wreckage from the Electra aircraft, then what the heck is it? Right? Tell me that. Okay. So let's dispense with the idea that it's a tree, because it's not a tree. The evidence is very clear on that subject. I can show you lots of imagery which is not consistent with a tree. And it certainly has been there for a long time, much longer than any tree might be able to survive in that water. If it's not a tree, then what is it? The only other thing I can come up with is alien spacecraft, right? So, given that, I think it's very likely to be wreckage from the Electra. But of course, it's possible that there's something else that was there that nobody knows about, right? So
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's something else that's never been reported before. We'll find out.
I look forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, Rick, what's the plan? When do you hope to get out there?
We have it on the calendar now. Um,
Mm.
the project will take place, the field work takes place between July 28th and August 14th of 2026. We'll be departing from Majuro, the capital of the Marshall Island, which is to the north, on July 28th, it takes about 6 days to sail from there to Nikumaroro. Spend about 5 days on Niku, and then sail back to arrive in Majuro on August 14th.
Very exciting stuff. Well, we wish you the best of luck, and we'll be watching.
Right, thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, you're very
Thanks,
welcome.
Matt.
Happy to do it.
Yeah. Interesting chat.
If you'd like to check out Dr. Pettigrew's vlog series, Unveiling the Taraia Object, and over 400 other titles about cultural heritage and archaeology from around the world, you can visit Heritage Broadcasting Service at heritagetac.org and enter coupon code SINGFORSCIENCE for 25% off any subscription plan. That's heritagetac.org, coupon code SINGFORSCIENCE for 25% off. To check out The Last Flight and keep up to date with Jay and Public Service Broadcasting, please visit the band's website, publicservicebroadcasting.net. Sing for Science is co-produced by Talkhouse and made possible in part by a grant from the Simons Foundation. Our music is by Panoram, social media manager is Bailey Constas, and our digital producer is Keenan Cush. If you like Sing for Science, the best way you can support us is to give us a review, tell a friend about the show, and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. For more information, please visit singforscience.org and follow us on social media at Sing for Science. Thanks for listening.